Hi, it's Lori, and I'm here today with my May reading wrap up. I read 10 books in the month of May, and I'm going to go ahead and get started with the nonfiction books that I read. I read A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. This book is kind of a natural history sort of book, but Bill Bryson, the author, decided to try to hike the Appalachian Trail. And this is funny. This is one of those books that I had a hard time putting down to read the other things I was trying to read at the same time. He's just hilarious, but there is some crude humor and crude language, so this is not one I would give to my kids right away. Just a little bit crass from time to time. But so many interesting facts about the Appalachian trails, the just hiking in general, the National Forest Service, animals, and their different history in the area, what trees, tree blights. I mean, just all sorts of interesting things in this book. And he hikes with a friend, and the two of them are just pretty hilarious together. So, this is one I really enjoyed. I gave this one 4 stars. Okay, the other 3 nonfiction books that I read this month, all were Catholic books. 2 out of the 3 of them I was using for my Catholic challenge. So the first was Our Lady of Kibeho by Immaculée Ilbigaza. Now, Immaculée Ilbigaza survived the genocide in Rwanda, and she has a couple other books, one called Left to Tell, which is about that, which I've had on my shelf forever, but I just haven't been able to bring myself to read just because I know it's going to be a hard one to read. Our Lady of Kibeho does touch on the genocide just a little bit, but it focuses in on Marian apparitions that happened in the really small rural town of Kibeho. Our Lady came to a young girl at a school, and then she started appearing to several girls at that school, and it spread from there. So it's all about the history of Our Lady of Kibeho, and you can tell that Immaculée just really feels deeply about Our Lady of Kibeho. This was a fabulous book, and I gave it 5 stars. I would certainly read this again. Our Lady of Kibeho was my book about Mary for the Catholic Challenge. Also for my Catholic Challenge, this fulfilled my book by a non-Catholic that all the Catholics are reading, and that is The Benedict Option by Rod Dreher. I'm a little late to the party on this one because I think most people had already read this before I did. I enjoyed this book. I ended up pairing it with 2 different books, and my husband and I did a discussion video on the 3 books, which I will link above. My main thoughts on The Benedict Option is that Rod Dreher has a good idea about building community and how we can do that, but he comes at it from kind of a place of extreme fear, and I didn't really appreciate that. I don't think that Rod Dreher is rooted enough to tell other people how to become rooted, so I think that was probably the main failing of this book. I did give it 4 stars on Goodreads. I went back and forth on whether it was a 3-star or a 4-star because he has some really good ideas and some really good encouragement in here. I decided to go with 4 stars, but I would say this is on the lower end of 4 stars for me. The next nonfiction book I read, I paired with The Benedict Option, and I listened to it on Audible, and that was Strangers in a Strange Land by Archbishop Charles Chaput. He's the current Archbishop of Philadelphia. He was Archbishop of Denver for most of my younger years. And Strangers in the Strange Land tackles kind of the same topic as The Benedict Option, like what we do as Christians in a society that is moving away from Christianity being the norm. So I really thought his ideas were better than Rod Dreher, but his writing style is pretty plain. He also got 4 stars. The Strangers in a Strange Land, I think, was a 4-star book for a different reason. The writing just is a little harder to get through because it's just very bullet point format. So I do recommend Strangers in a Strange Land. I think it's a little bit better on tackling the subject than the Benedict option. The third book I paired with the Benedict option and Strangers in a Strange Land was The Awakening of Miss Prim by Natalia San Martin Finarella, I think we decided. My husband's better at pronouncing names than I am. This is more of a literary fiction book, so this is fiction. And it's the story of Miss Prim, who answers an advertisement for a man looking for a private librarian. And she ends up moving to this community, into this house. And the community is kind of what the Benedict option and Strangers in a Strange Land kind of point to as something that we can do. But as my husband pointed out to me, this is a little bit of a like Pride and Prejudice retelling. It's a little bit of a romance. So Miss Prim falls for the man in the wing chair, which is the only name we have for her employer throughout the whole book. And he falls for her, but they are very far apart on the topic of religion. So this is a book I really love. I've read it, I think 4 times. Several times anyway. And it's just one that I always enjoy reading. So this is a 5-star book for me. I've read a couple of mystery type books. The first one is definitely falls under the mystery category, and that is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I had never read an Agatha Christie book before, and this one is kind of like the classic novel. I believe this was the one that was listed in the Book of Books, the Great American Read book that I reviewed a couple months ago. And I really enjoyed this story. It was formerly published as 10 Little Indians, and it has a poem in it, a 10 Little Indians poem, not one that I learned. It's a little more problematic. I'm sure it got edited by the time I was a kid. But all the Indians disappear in different ways until then there were none. And that's kind of how the story goes. So this poem keeps showing up, and they have little Indian figurines, and people keep dying in ways that relate back to the poem. And I did not figure out who done it on this. I was pretty shocked with I think there was kind of an epilogue which was explaining who done it, basically. So it was really well written, and that definitely made me interested in reading more Agatha Christie in the future. I gave that one 5 stars. Another book that I also don't have present, I had it as a Kindle book, was The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey. I was using this one as well for my Catholic 2019 challenge. This is my book about a Catholic monarch. I had a hard time fulfilling that one, and my husband suggested this book. I don't quite know how to classify it. It is part of a series, I guess, of detective stories, but the detective in the story is in the hospital because he got hurt on a case. And people are trying to cheer him up and bringing him books and whatever. And one of his friends ends up bringing him a bunch of portraits because he's really into faces. And each portrait had a mystery behind it or something. And the one he becomes intrigued with is a portrait of King Richard III. And the mystery behind that was that his 2 nephews disappeared, and it was presumed he murdered him. So if you're familiar with Shakespeare at all, you probably know kind of this whole storyline that has been perpetuated through time with Shakespeare. And that was the storyline that came out in Tudor era was that King Richard III killed his nephews to secure his throne. But the detective finds out through the course of his research while lying in bed, and he has this young man doing some research for him at the British Museum, that was not the case at all. So you find out a whole different story that makes a lot more sense than the story that is kind of widely known. So it was just fascinating. I read this one also with a book buddy, and we were both just floored. I think we read it in 3 or 4 days. It's not a very long book, but it's really hard to put down once you get going. I think there's only about 16 chapters in it, maybe. So I highly recommend The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey. It was written in the 50s. And yeah, I learned a lot from that book, and it's going to stick with me for a while. So that was another definitely 5-star book. The next book is one that I read because it came in Charlotte's Owl Crate subscription, and she wanted me to pre-read it before she read it because Charlotte is 12. She reads an extremely high level, but sometimes we have to worry about the content because she's 12. So that was Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. This one was okay. The things I enjoyed about this is I started reading this right after finishing The Brothers Karamazov, and I also have another Russian novel coming up. And this is kind of inspired by that area of the. I think it says it's has a Slavic inspiration, but basically, how this book operates, what this book is about is there's 2 different countries and they rely on 2 different forms of magic, and one of the forms of magic relies upon the gods. So it's through prayer that the gods give you power to do different things. And then the other country uses blood magic, where they cut themselves open and stick a spell to it, and that's how the spells work. So we've got battling countries. So one from one country teams up with one from the other country, and so the plot line of this book is they decide they need to go assassinate the king of the blood magic country to try to end this war. So there's lots of twists and turns. It's very fast-paced, probably a little too fast-paced for me, but then again, I'm not the target audience. This is a YA book, so I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was fun. I don't know that I'd seek out book 2 when it comes out, but I didn't find it to be problematic, and I cleared it. Charlotte can read this if she wants to. I actually checked the audiobook out from the library to finish that one up because I was just really tired of reading and I wanted to get it done. I've been having trouble with my eyes getting tired when I read, and so when I went to the eye doctor, they made me get bifocals this time. So hopefully that will at least help my reading, but it's kind of handy to listen to the audiobook because there are so many Russian sounding names. It was nice to know how they were supposed to be pronounced. So I did finish that one up in audiobook. I did mention that I read another Russian novel. I participated in a read-along on Goodreads. It was hosted by Olive from the channel A Book Olive, and I will link her below. And that was for the book The Big Green Tent by Lyudmila Ulitskaya. And The Big Green Tent is a story about 3, they start out as boys at the beginning of the book, that are friends, and it takes place during the communist era. So it follows the lives of these 3 boys. One is kind of a photographer, one is a musician, and the third, he's a little harder to peg down. He's a very compassionate person. So we have these 3 main characters, but because it's a Russian novel, there's a lot of side characters that come in, and they all kind of interrelate. It hops back and forth in time a lot. So, the boys will be boys, and then we'll follow one of the boys, and then all of a sudden he'll be like old and dying or whatever. Although none of them were really particularly old, the ones that died in the novel, but I mean like middle-aged and dying maybe. So, and then we'll jump back to them being kids and follow another one for a while, and then there'll be this side story that comes in about one of the side characters. So it was hard. It's not very linear, so it was a little hard sometimes to know where you were. But after finishing the book, you kind of see why the author chose to jump around in time like that, because all of the interactions affect each other. So So something that you already learned about in one person's story life is going to be shown in a little bit of a different light in the context of one of the other characters' stories. So I thought it was a pretty interesting book. It's definitely not one that I would probably pick up again, but I'm glad I read it. I did give this one 4 stars. It was compelling and it was interesting. There were a few times that I contemplated DNFing the book, but I'm glad I kind of pushed through because there are just chunks that were a lot better in my opinion than other chunks, but I do see the purpose of those chunks I didn't really love for the most part. There are still a few things that I thought could have been left out entirely, but I understand why the book was structured the way it was. And then the final book I finished in the month of May was The Dragon Reborn, which is the 3rd book in the Wheel of Time series. I ended up having to return my hard copy to the library when I was about 30 chapters in. Fortunately, the library also had a digital audiobook available, so I did finish this up as an audiobook. I had tried it before because I wanted to get a feel for how the names were pronounced, and I did not like the audiobook the first time through. The first time through with book 1 or 2, I had only heard the male narrator, and there's a narrating couple that do them. So when you're with the boys in the story, the man is narrating, and when you're with the girls in the story, the woman is narrating. I like the female narrator a little bit more than the male narrator. I got used to him, so it was tolerable by the end. I did bump it to 1.2 speed, which was a little fast, but the Overdrive app doesn't have a 1.15 or anything between 1 and 1.2. So that was a little fast for the speed he spoke, but I found his regular speaking to be a little slow, so I wished there was an in-between. I really enjoyed The Dragon Reborn. I gave it 5 stars. I think I've given all of the Wheel Time books so far 5 stars. This is the first Wheel of Time book where I actually kind of liked Matt. I found him to be just kind of an annoying little twit in books 1 and 2. But now that he's been healed from his wound that I don't even know how to call it a wound, but now that he's been healed from the problem he had in book 1, he became a much better character. He still is a bit of a handful, but I've enjoyed his personality a lot more this time. I also enjoyed having Tom back in the story, and it's interesting to see where it's going to go from here, because we did kind of get to a aha moment at the end of the 3rd book, so I will be continuing on with the 4th book in June. So those were my May 2019 books. Those were the books I read in May 2019. If you have read any of these books or have recommendations for me based on these books, please let me know in the comments. I would love to have you subscribe so you don't miss a video. Either the ones I do by myself or the ones I do with my girls or my husband. I might be able to drag him into another one. And I hope you all have a very good day. Bye.